Our meditation this morning is by Evan Carville Zemer. If we lived in another climate, our souls might speak other languages. We might speak oasis or permafrost, dry season or monsoon. But our souls speak spring. Our souls speak green shoots pushing through last year's leaves. Our souls speak buds stretching to sun. Our souls speak mud puddle and nest building, damp earth and worm castings, tiny green leaves and frog choruses. We speak spring because spring sings in us. We gather to nurture our faith in our own growing, our own courage to push through, our own blossoming in beauty, our own small part in the spring of this world. Come, let us worship together. Amen. Is by Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, also known on her blog as the Velveteen Rabbi. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. Exodus 12:34. You'll need to travel light. Take what you can carry: a book, a poem, a battered tin cup, your child strapped to your chest, clutching your necklace in one hot, possessive fist. So the dough isn't ready, so your heart isn't ready. You haven't said goodbye to the places where you hid as a child, to the friends who aren't interested in the journey, to the graves you've tended. But if you wait until you feel fully ready, you may never take the leap at all. And infinity is calling you forth out of this birth canal and into the future's wide expanse. Learn to improvise flat cakes without yeast. Learn to read new alphabets. Wear God like a cloak and stride forth with confidence. You won't know where you're going, but you have the words of our sages, the songs of our mothers, the inspiration wrapped in your kneading bowl. Trust that what you carry will sustain you, and take the first step out the door. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called life. I had to quote Prince. All of us millennial ministers agreed we would all do this morning as a tribute. True words. Today we explore the story of Passover. The telling I've chosen is based on a Haggadah specifically created for a Unitarian Universalist audience. A Haggadah is a book used at a Passover Seder designed to take the participants through the story of the Jewish people as it's told in the Bible. The word Haggadah means telling. If any of you have been to a Passover Seder, you know that the story is told over the course of a long meal, and that everyone participates in the telling. This story is told in the Hebrew Bible, also called the Torah. In the book of Exodus, we learn that long ago the Jewish people were made the slaves of a harsh ruler called the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh forced the Jews to do back-breaking labor, making bricks and building buildings that would bring him glory. The Pharaoh was also paranoid and was deeply afraid that someday one of the Jewish boys would grow up to be king of the land. And so he ordered that all young Jewish boys be killed. Many were killed, but one baby named Moses was saved by the Pharaoh's daughter, and she raised him like he was her own son. One day, Moses saw a soldier hurting a slave, and while trying to help the slave, he killed the soldier. Moses knew that the Pharaoh would be very angry with him, so he ran away. He became a shepherd in a faraway land. One day, as he was wandering with his sheep, Moses saw something strange. A small bush was on fire, burning brightly. As he got closer to it, he realized that the bush was speaking to him. Moses believed it was the voice of God telling him to go back to Egypt and free the Jewish people from slavery. Moses followed the directions he heard and returned to Egypt, where he found that the old Pharaoh had died and a new Pharaoh had come to power. Moses asked the new Pharaoh to let the Jewish people go, but he would not. Moses warned that bad things would happen to the people of Egypt if the Pharaoh did not free the Jewish people. But still the Pharaoh would not listen. And horrible things began to happen. 10 plagues came, one after the other. Blood, frogs, lice, wild beasts, cattle disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness. And after each, Moses asked for the Jews to be freed, and after each, the Pharaoh refused. The final plague was the killing of the firstborn children. To save their own children from this plague, the Jews were told to put the blood of a lamb over their door, and this way the angel of death would know which homes to pass over. And so it is told that the firstborn of all the Egyptians was killed, including the Pharaoh's son. After this, the Pharaoh finally let the Jewish people leave Egypt, but he sent his army to follow them. He told his army to trap the Jewish people against the sea and kill them. When the Jews were at the water's edge and the army was close behind, the water miraculously parted, and the Jews were able to cross. When the army tried to follow, the waters flowed quickly back, and the men were all swept away by the water, never to be seen again. While the destruction of the Egyptian army gave the Jewish people their freedom, it did not solve all their problems. For now they were lost in the desert, on a journey with no known destination. And the desert held hardships of its own. After a time, the known harshness of slavery in Egypt seemed better than the unknown troubles the desert was putting in front of them. In Egypt, they knew that there would be food and a roof over their heads. In the desert, they did not know what any day would hold for them. Some people turned against Moses as they wandered for 40 years in the desert. 40 years later, the children of those who had left slavery behind in Egypt entered a new land and began a new life as a community. Passover is a joyous holiday, but it is one that recognizes great sacrifice. The Jews gained their freedom, but many Egyptians lost their lives. The joy of modern Passover celebrations is tempered by awareness of current sorrow and oppression in all parts of the world. So Passover serves as a reminder that we too have to work for freedom for all to live a life of joy. You know how I am in love with the book Spiritual Literacy, Reading the Sacred in Everyday Life. Here is what Frederick and Mary Ann Broussard say about symbols. They say, we read the world for what it teaches us about spirit. Sometimes these lessons are expressed in analogies, metaphors, symbols, and stories. Through this kind of reading, we gain a new understanding of our place in the universe and learn to recognize the many movements of spirit. To me, this is what Passover is about. It's about paying attention to story and to symbol, to tell and retell one story of liberation until we gain a new understanding of our place in the universe and learn to recognize more readily the many movements of spirit. Passover is a holiday rich with symbolism. I have a plate full of symbols before me here. So let's explore this Passover Seder plate together. Part of the Seder script is the 4 questions, and these are traditionally read by the youngest child. The child asks,
"On all other nights we eat leavened or unleavened bread. Why on this night do we eat only unleavened bread?"
An adult answers, "When the Jewish people fled from Egypt, they were in a great hurry and did not have time to allow their bread dough to rise. The sun baked their bread with its heat, and since the dough did not rise, it was flat. They called this flat bread matzo. To remember this, tonight we eat only matzo." A child asks,
"On all other nights we eat many kinds of herbs. Why on this night do we eat only bitter herbs?"
An adult answers, "The Jewish people lived bitter lives in Egypt. We eat the bitter herbs to remind us of their suffering and the suffering many people still face." Now, on a side note, for those of us who did not grow up Jewish, there is a learning curve to a Seder. And I've told you this story before, but I kind of consider it my Goyim public service announcement. At my very first Passover Seder in my early 20s, I had no idea what was meant by bitter herbs. And I didn't recognize the ingredients of the little beet spread on my plate, next to the yummy apple and walnut salad. So when we were told to make a sandwich using the matzah, haroset, and maror, I did so with a big blob of this spread called maror. And as I swallowed, my eyes began to water and my nose began to burn fiercely. And I thought I was going to die. But not wanting to call any attention to my impending death, I waited, and as soon as I could breathe again, I whispered to my neighbor, "What is in this?" And that is when I learned about horseradish. So Seder goers, beware. Back to the questions. A child asks,
"On all other nights we do not dip one food in another. Why on this night do we dip the parsley in salt water and the bitter herbs in haroset?"
An adult answers, "We dip parsley in salt water to remind us that even in the best of times, there may be sorrow. We dip the bitter herbs in haroset to remind us that even the most bitter experiences in life can be sweetened with hope and freedom." A child asks,
"On all other nights, people sit up straight at the table. Why on this night may we recline during dinner?
An adult answers, long ago, reclining at the table was a sign of a free person. We may recline tonight to remind us that the Jewish people were freed from slavery. And there are many other symbols here, and I'll go over just a few more. On the Seder plate, we also see the roasted shank bone, reminding us of the lamb blood that the Jews placed above their doors so that the angel of death would pass over. An egg, which is a sign of renewed life. And here is one that is not on all Seder plates, but which I love, the orange. This is a new addition to the Seder plate. It came about in the 1970s when the first women rabbis were being ordained. One man yelled out, "Women belong on the bima as much as an orange belongs on a Seder plate." And ever since then, people have been putting oranges on their Seder plates as a symbol of the struggle for equality for all people. This seems fitting to me. We cannot celebrate our own liberation while others are waiting desperately for theirs. If we are going to tell and retell an ancient story of liberation, we must also be working for liberation in our own lives and for the lives around us. This is the point I most want to make about symbolism and story in religion. It's not enough to honor the ancient symbols and stories. We must invent and honor our own too. If religion is based only on a book written 2,000 years ago, it is not a living religion. If the only story we tell is one that has little to do with our own lives, it is not a living story. If we are going to tell the story of Passover, then we should be curious about how it applies to the current day. Who in our world is playing the role of the Pharaoh? What in our lives constitutes the bitter herb? What constitutes the sweet? And what does it mean for us that both are on our plate at the same time? How do we deal with sorrow and joy together? The Passover story is a difficult one. The sacrifice of firstborn children, the blood on the doorways, it's not an easy story. Liberation is never easy. What hard sacrifices need to be made today to ensure freedom, liberty, and justice for all people, not just some people? And let's not forget that even after that first liberation from slavery, there was the wandering in the desert. 40 years of wandering, of questioning choices, of undermining leadership, of doubt and fear and unknowing. It wasn't the original people who fled Egypt who made it into the promised land. It was their children. What do we need to take the long view on and make sacrifices for in our lives that will not benefit us, but our children, our grandchildren? Where are those places in our lives that feel like deserts? Where are the places that feel like being lost on the way to something better? Can we trust in the future, even when the future is not clear? Can we stick together as a community, even in the face of great unknowing? Who needs us to add a new symbol or new language to our ceremonies to know that they too deserve a place there? How do we show that we are willing to change our comfortable traditions to prove that? What does the egg stand for in our lives? What is the new life waiting to be born? These are the questions that the symbols of Passover raise for all of us. It's an ancient story, but it's a living story if we choose it to be. We read the world for what it teaches us about spirit. Sometimes these lessons are expressed in analogies, metaphors, symbols, and stories. Through this kind of reading, we gain a new understanding of our place in the universe and learn to recognize the many movements of spirit. Kathleen McTeague writes, "There's a reason why the stories of Passover and Easter are told at a time when the spring is spilling out all around us. It makes it easier to believe that we too have some new life to pull from our spirits and offer one another. May we do just that. L'chaim. Amen. Blessed be."